thank you everyone for turning up. Thank you especially to Bjarke and Niels from HQ. No pressure, but you're our chief answerers for today's session. That doesn't mean that no one else is, everyone is welcome to chip in. Obviously there is quite a few of us, so let's just be mindful about being on mute when you're not talking and just listening to other people, letting them finish their sentences before you jump in. I will try and keep an eye on the chat. So if you have anything to say but you don't want to interrupt, post it in the chat and I will try and bring it in at the appropriate moment. And without further ado, I have my nominated first questioner, Mr. Kevin Jump. You may recognize him from the community hours yesterday. And actually, let's be honest, this virtual meetup came about because I was listening to the Package Manifest podcast where Kevin and Matt seemed to have questions and Bjarke said he can answer them. And I thought, well, why don't we all just come and listen to Bjarke answer the questions that they had? So I'll now shut up. Over to you, Kevin, please.
Okay. I suppose start with the hopefully easy one first. The management API, what version of Umbraco is it currently scheduled to land in?
It's scheduled to come in 14 together with the new back office. So the main reason is we are changing the underlying Json framework from Newtonsoft to system text JSON. And it needs to follow along because otherwise it breaks the existing back office.
Okay. And then the follow-up question, will the management API sit alongside or completely replace the services that are currently on Umbraco? So content service, content type service. Are they going anywhere? Or are they going to still be there and the management API sits on top of that?
It sits on top, but we kind of improve the services. So we move a lot of logic from the existing controllers into the services. So we have adapted an old pattern we already had, the attempt pattern, so we can return more information. So when you want to create a content, you can have information about what was actually wrong, because all these things was handled in the controllers before and just returning bad requests in given circumstances.
Yeah. To follow on to that one, if you've moved stuff from controllers, the current services, a lot of them don't care, not care might be the wrong word, about security. So you don't need to be a user with the right permissions to, say, create a document type using the services. Is that going to change if that logic's moved from the controllers, where presumably that sort of check was going on, back into the services, or the services still free, as it were?
So far, the services will still be free. All the authorization will happen on the management API level.
Right. Okay. So the management APIs are essentially a set of controllers with a certain pattern now, aren't they? So you call them, in theory, callable from outside of Umbraco with the right tokens, etc. And they're using Swagger to document that. So there's a Swagger endpoint which appears, I believe, when you're in development. If you're a package developer working alongside, or any developer working alongside the new management API, how would you go about using that Swagger information for your own APIs? Do you have to configure your own Swagger endpoints? Can you hijack the Umbraco one, or are you tied to using the Umbraco Swagger implementation? I don't know loads about Swagger. I know a little bit, but how it appears is that I'm sort of wondering how you work in the same pattern as Umbraco.
Yeah, so currently the Swagger actually picks up all API controllers. So we have defined 3 schemas. One that is just called default, which is empty by default, but whatever you create will end up in that schema. Then we have the delivery API schema, and we have the management API schema. The idea is you use these schemas to build your models for your client. So it's not the idea you extend those. The idea is you will have your using management API schema and potentially using or whatever package delivery API schema.
Like commerce schema, for example.
Yeah. And right now we have added an attribute basically where we can say map to API. So maybe I can share my screen if I'm allowed.
You should be allowed. And map
I'm
browser.
concerned about my own computers. Just say desktop 1, 2, and 3. I have a warning sign.
Maybe Matt Brailsford wants to say what he says while Bjarke tries to share.
Yeah, I was just going to say that that's basically exactly what we've done for Umbraco Commerce. I know we're a HQ product now, but essentially it's still a package and an add-on to Umbraco. So we've done exactly that in terms of define your own Swagger API. There's like a bit of boilerplate in terms of setting that up so that it hooks into like the Swagger menu. There's a few little gotchas in terms of making sure that things don't bleed over into other definitions, and make sure that your rules within your Swagger API don't like affect any of the other APIs on there. But yeah, fundamentally you can have your own complete Swagger implementation that's just specific for your particular package.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So if I just make a simple controller like this one, mark it as an API controller and give it some kind of path, it will end up in the default API. And then I also made an example from a package. So here I have a composer where I configure my package API Swagger gen options, which is following the standard configure options pattern, and adds another schema to Swagger with my name. Here's just my package and some information, which is the information used here. So this creates another schema. And then when I have a controller, I can use the map to API, and then it will only be presented on that schema.
Okay.
So here I also added some more things, but just to show how it will end up. Then I have my own schema here. Now I have one obsoleted endpoint, which is version 1, another version 2. Yeah.
So I suppose while you've got the code open, I'm aware that the authentication's changing a bit. So currently, most people will probably create an Umbraco authorized API or authorized Json controller. I can probably see the answer there, but what do you do now if you want to back office secure? Is it the authorized policy statements? And is there, and I suspect I know the answer to this, is there any way to prepare for this in like version 12 and 13 so that it's not a big hit when people move the controller, move stuff across?
So far, we don't have a good way to prepare, but maybe we can figure out a way to backport some of these parts.
Because I think a discussion a while ago, the Umbraco API authorized controllers are going, because obviously they're not, this is replacing them. But my understanding at the moment is that's a hard breaking change, as it were, where they will be in 13, they won't be in 14.
Yeah.
There won't currently, is there no way to do any of this a bit early, even if it's just like decorating classes? There currently isn't, is there? That's just my understanding of it.
Yeah, and we haven't figured out a way to make it, but maybe we can backport some of it to 13 to prepare people, but to be honest, I'm not sure whether we can manage to do that.
Yeah.
But we haven't looked much into the authorization yet, but something that we are currently aware of is when you set it up, you both have to specify it for your actual endpoint and for the Swagger documentation. Hopefully we can make a way to just say act as an Umbraco management API endpoint.
Cool.
And then it will just put on all the same Swagger filters and authorization filters and stuff like that. at least that's the idea.
Cool.
We have a question from Carl, just wondering at what stage the management API is in terms of completeness.
It's not done yet, but it's far. But especially the complex parts around content and publishing and compositions and all these things are what we are working on currently. But I can show it if people haven't seen it.
Is this in the latest Alpha 14 preview? As the management APIs there?
Yeah, it have been in all the previews.
Yeah.
So here we have we have audit log, we have culture, we have data types, dictionary, blueprints, doc types. As you can see, that there's quite a lot of APIs already. But the authorization is not complete. So right now it's just requires back office access basically on all of them. So this is one of the things we're working on currently together with the complex parts about content and content types.
And just skipping to the front side of this at the moment, in the new API, the new front office, new back office, the new front end for the back office, most of this will be plumbed in already. In fact, all of it, and there'll be, I can't remember the phrase, these are resources or something, contexts in the new back office. So you don't actually necessarily need to know this to do some of this from, if you needed to for some reason. I can't necessarily, if you needed to talk to this management API from the new back office, you won't necessarily go direct yourself. You will go via these contexts. Do I understand that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And that's all plumbed in. Yeah.
But yeah, that's right. We have a front end, what we want to call it, classes that will deal with this for you. So you don't need to care about what endpoints is being called. There's a sort of framework to handle it.
And I don't want to go too deep into this. Very briefly, if I had my own package management API with, let's just say, a couple of calls, not complicated things, and I wanted to use them in the new back office, what are roughly the steps, things you'd have to implement, like the rough things you'd have to implement in the new back office to be able to get to your API in a nice way?
Yeah, so you can just call them like any other endpoints, like you're used to fetching them, and we'll deliver some tools, utilities to do it easily for you. That would be the easy way. That would most likely cover your needs.
Right.
Yeah.
But Umbraco is doing like a context caching scoping thing, isn't it? I don't really know, but there's a set of steps, isn't there, in between in the actual API. If you wanted to follow the super way of doing it, there's more stuff to do.
Yeah, well, it depends a little bit on what you want.
Okay.
Yeah, and the documentation is not there yet, but we are actually close to get a look at that. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. But
I know obviously that's probably really technical and I know still up in the air. I was just wondering if there's if there's some helper tools there, it'll probably help. You're probably right that I'm thinking of mine now. They're probably just going to be, I currently have a lot of HTTP GETs inside services and they become fetch API things, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And we'll wrap that so you have proper error handling and if you're logged out and all that.
Yeah.
But it's basically that.
Okay.
Yeah, and there exists a lot of tools that can generate code from the Swagger schema or the OpenAPI schema.
Just to jump in terms of discoverability, are you going to basically rely on Swagger from kind of day one and then get the documentation more in line, because people will be familiar with the services and the old ways of doing things, but how will people know which APIs to call and when? And yeah, or is it a case of there'll be maybe a couple of samples out there, or just rely on the back office to know kind of what to call when?
Yeah, I'm not completely familiar with what documentation we have today of these parts.
not so much yet, I have to admit.
We have a question from your colleague, Ronald, actually. I like the fact that you've come here, Ronald, to ask your colleague a question. That's quite fun. Are the APIs designed to account for new planned features like culture variant media items? I didn't know that was planned. That's nice. Reusable blocks, etc.
So we haven't had a target version for these features, but it's definitely something we talk about, we want to have in the future. And yes, the web API parts are prepared for these things, so it will come like it had variants. You just have no way to set it up, basically. And this is also to align the APIs between content and media and so on.
It just popped into my head then. Obviously, with the new API, you've swapped them from Newtonsoft JSON to system text JSON. Are you aware of anything that might catch people out in terms of changes to what that means to data that they might get? I mean, I know it's completely new, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm just wondering if there's anything you've come across and gone, oh, that's going to be a
lot of things, to be honest. If you don't follow the JSON standards, then it will just complain by default, where Newtonsoft JSON was like JavaScript back in the days, where the browsers tried to interpret what you meant and do it for you.
I've done a little bit.
So things like having single quotes for strings, apparently we used that in our tests. It completely failed. Stuff like that will definitely fail. And then I think we had some changes with polymorphism and stuff. I can't remember exactly all of them, but we actually started some documentation about this while we are hitting it.
One of the big ones, I think, historically with Newtonsoft is people doing global settings to overwrite case and all of that. That then triggers down and catches everybody out who hasn't caught it lower on. But yeah.
Ravi, I wonder if you want to come off mute and say what you're typing in the chat. Are you able to do that?
I could, but you just read it. No, just following up on the JSON thing. Basically, there's a lot of little small things. It doesn't complain very loudly or accurately, and you just sort of have to bash your way through it. Admittedly, I was doing this on another platform, so it might be better in this one. But yes, just keep an eye out for various things. It won't always complain the way you think it should.
One of the things actually that comes back to the migration that I tripped over was I a couple of months ago I thought, oh, I'll have a go. I'll start whipping the JSON Newtonsoft out of some of the Heutinck controllers so that it serializes it as system text JSON, which works fine. But actually, at the moment, if you do an Umbraco authorized controller, there's actually a JSON attribute on it that uses Newtonsoft. So you can do all your stuff as system text, but you can't do the full end-to-end because at some point it hits Newtonsoft. So if you have a controller that returns an object, it will be serialized in version 11, 12 by Newtonsoft, and you can't really stop that, I think, so that you can't pre-test completely end-to-end. You can rip out all of your JSON convert serialized code, but when you do that at the moment, so I wonder if a possibility in something like 13 would be to have a controller where you say this one does it via system JSON text, so you could potentially check all your objects serialized before you hit 14. I don't know.
No, I don't know either. No. Of course, if it's possible, we would like to provide it. But I think in our code base, it's mainly some of the legacy parts back from 7 and 8 that heavily use the J object and J array and these dynamic types from Newtonsoft, which have been the worst part to migrate.
But a lot of the like block lists and stuff will serialize, obviously, with a default, whatever the serializer is. So at the moment, they'll be doing system Newtonsoft empty, but presumably they're all going to just work with system text. That'll be okay.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So from what I'm hearing at the moment, there isn't really anything you can do within your current package to help lay the path for a v14 compatible? Or have I got that wrong?
I think you can start moving to web components. At least that's my idea for my own small maps package, and move as much of the logic into the web component as possible, because that will be reusable.
And that could be released now.
Yeah.
Just as a standard update to your existing package. And has anyone done that, or is anyone about to do that? Because that would be a nice thing to see in the real world. I don't know enough about
asking for a lot of brave people, aren't you?
Okay, let me rephrase. When someone's done that, can they make sure that they share it? Dennis, of course, sorry, Dennis in the package team has been doing some work on this and has actually shared it. Sorry, Dennis. You see, for me, terminology like web components, lit, apart from in the slang terminology, doesn't mean much to me. So I just look ahead at the new back office and just think there's a lot to learn. And as I don't yet know these technologies, I'm like gonna wait for people who are more familiar with them to show me the bits I need to know for Umbraco packages, in a way that you didn't need to know the whole of Angular JS to be able to do Umbraco stuff. You just needed to know how to do the things within Umbraco. So as much as it's sort of useful to learn about these things, it's like, yeah, but do I have to learn all of it? How much is there to learn? Or can I just copy someone else? Let's be honest, I learned a lot from copying what Kevin did in Heutinck, because App Plugins had the Heutinck files in, and that's where I learned. So I think a lot of us learned, Kevin, Angular JS from you. No pressure, but thank you.
Oh dear.
So it sounds like at the moment we have Dennis. Can you remind us, Dennis, in the chat where we can see what you've been up to implementing more future-proof ideas in your packages? Does anyone else have any other questions? Yes, Matt Brailsford has raised his hand. Over to you, Matt.
I was just going to say, yes, it's potentially a lot to learn from a front-end perspective, but I think you've also got to remember that Angular was a massive, like the whole point of Angular was to have everything in-house. So yes, there's a lot of things to learn individually, but if you looked at Angular like as a thing itself, it is all those parts. So you still had to learn all those things. It was just, you could say you could do Angular. So it's like you still got a lot of things, or you still had to learn a lot of things to be able to do Angular. If you see what I mean. It's Angular itself was just a massive tool that did a lot of things. So yes, we've got more to learn, but technically it's probably of the same scale. Everything's just broken out and given individual names. That's really the way I see it.
And maybe, Matt, another perspective is that since it's not a specific framework, but components as a native feature, then it's just your knowledge will not be limited to certain type of projects, but is a knowledge of how the browsers work. So I think there's a lot to gain to invest time in learning these new features.
Yeah, I've started. Look, I started my journey as being actually the documentation's quite good. The back office, the new back office API does have a good set of how to create a dashboard and stuff has actually been fleshed out quite a bit. So if you're starting completely from scratch, that's where I've been looking. But I haven't done loads. I've just sort of dabbled. But it's also a good place to get really quick PRs into the documentation if you want to get your GitHub score up.
Can you just remind me where that was, Kevin? Because I got distracted by the
It's
Angular.
the new back office API documentation. It's on the Umbraco documentation somewhere. There's a new back office section.
Ronald's shaking his head, nodding his head, so he'll put a link.
Yeah, in there there's a how to create a property editor, how to create a thing, and it actually, more importantly, how to set up all of the TypeScript Vites type build stuff, which isn't hard, but it's always good that someone's actually told you how to do it.
Cool, thank you.
And maybe another perspective to be aware about is that since the new back office is built on extensions itself, then all the code that we have can inspire you to build your extensions. So everything you think could be an extension or make sense to be extendable, we never done before we made the extension point, and then we've only built extensions ourselves. So if you clone down the repository, you'll find code that does exactly the same as you'll do. There's manifest files that are declaring the UI extension and so on. So actually, small bits and pieces of the current back office can just be extracted and put as a package. So hopefully that will make life much easier.
That's my favorite thing of seeing like internal demos, is just that extensions are the first class citizen. So like there's no building something specific for Umbraco. It has to be done through the extensions API, exactly what you would use as a package developer. And if that's not possible, then that means extending the extensions API to allow extra functionality rather than just shoehorning in Umbraco specific stuff that you don't see. So that's by far my favorite thing whenever I see those.
Yeah, I have seen your hand up, Aaron. Don't worry, I'll come to you in a sec. Yeah, Richard's making a point in the chat. It'd be good to see any sort of these videos that could be shared if possible. I'm sure that the festival circuit that's coming up this autumn will have people showing things off. Whether they get recorded or not will depend on the actual festival itself. But anything that the HQ could share, if you are doing sort of small recordings of how to do X, Y, and Z, making those available would, I think, just be really useful so people can start getting a measure of the tasks ahead. Aaron's hand must be tired. It's been up for a while. Aaron, over to you. Aaron, can you come off mute? Or he's put his hand down, maybe.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't realize I was muted in the client as well as in my headphones. Yeah, so a couple of things really. So obviously Umbraco 7 to Umbraco 8, we had a big issue where there were no packages for a very, very long time, because a lot of the packages are created by individuals, not companies, that give up their free time they're not paid for. So is there going to be a decent window, I'm talking months, not weeks, where we're going to be able to port these packages? And is there an understanding from HQ that when 14 is officially released, you're probably talking another 6 to 8 months before you have a decent package library?
We are aware. That's also why we postponed the target release, because we want to have more than just a few weeks of feature complete state where we can test out and help out. Yeah. Okay. On the other hand, we're also a bit late to the party regarding the AngularJS and end of life.
Yeah. The other question is obviously around examples. So obviously between 7 and 8, the documentation wasn't great. It's a lot better now, but back then it wasn't. So again, for myself, who's not a front ender, and there's a lot of package developers that aren't front enders, is the documentation / examples going to be able to help? And is HQ going to be around to help migrate from the old back office to the new back office for some of the more complex packages where the developers are going to be out of their depth, they've never used lit or whatever?
I don't know what to answer. Of course, we want to help where possible, but we are not the one going to migrate your own packages.
No. I mean, is there going to be usable example code? You say, this is how you do this is how you do that.
Hopefully. The best thing we can do is ask for that documentation more concrete. What do you need to know? So we produce useful documentation instead of just producing wasteful documentation. So we have quite a big assigned task to produce documentation.
Yeah, and I just want to add that we're just getting started on the documentation, and Kevin, you already mentioned how to make a dashboard and how to make a property editor, which is very sorry for the word, simple examples compared to what you're requesting, Aaron. But we want to bring more what's called complex examples or the examples that you need, I think. But it's also, as Bjarke is saying, very much it depends a lot on what you want and what you need. So your inputs are actually really great, and I really loved seeing a lot of you in the CMS backstage corner this year's code card, because that gave me sort of an even more formed perspective on what it is you need out there. So please bring us the feedback, and if you get started early, we can maybe react to the difficulties that you are hitting. And Lottie, just to the what you were mentioning before, I'm doing a talk at this year's Dukfest, actually just about customizing the back office from a front-end perspective, though, but sort of touching what you're talking about today. And I hope as well to get some material out of that will form blog posts and etc. So there's going to be material, and hopefully there'll be even more.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's something that the community package team will be looking to help with as well, working out how to share examples, produce examples, share examples, and help bridge what feels a bit of a gap at the moment between HQ and community on where we're at with regards to the new back office. And quite right, because you've got to build it first before we can implement it, right? Ronald's pointed out that, of course, when we make the comparisons with the V7 to V8 roadmap, there was a bit of a surprise as to when V8 was released. It wasn't quite the predicted release that we had planned. So at least we do know when, and we do have the RCs now that we could start playing with, right? Sorry,
previews. It's not
previews.
RCs.
Sorry. Thank you for correct. That's why you're here, Bjarke. And so, yes, obviously we know that if we release Umbraco and none of the packages that people want to use are ready, they won't be looking to use V14 of Umbraco. But fingers crossed, we won't be anywhere near like it was for V8. And I'm sure everyone's going to work hard to help with that, albeit there is a lot of work. I will make sure that any links that people have posted in the chat, so for example to what Dennis has been working on and some other things, I'll make sure that we release that so people have access to it later. Kevin Jump.
Yes. Sorry, I was just going to follow on with, and it's mainly me not Googling because there might be the answer. The predictable release schedule for 14, just to clarify for people who are here. At the moment, we're on preview releases, which, let's say, may or may not be stable, as well, by definition of preview releases. Is there a date yet for what might be considered a release candidate or even a stable beta for package development? Because I know the announcements have said, package developers can start looking at them from preview 0 and preview 2, and I don't know if we're onto another preview. But obviously things do change in that quite a bit. So if you don't want to, and speaking personally, don't want to commit to developing stuff and then having to change a load of configuration in a week because a new preview's out, is there a date yet for when you might consider it to be not completely locked down, but stable? So a beta or a release candidate for 14. And I think 14 is due out in June 2024. Am I right? So,
yeah, roughly. I can't remember the exact date.
Yeah, middle of next year.
Yeah.
When is the and a typical release would only be 6 weeks, so it'd be mid-April.
Yeah. So the release candidate will again only be 6 weeks, but we plan to have a beta release where we consider it feature complete.
Yeah.
And the earlier the better. Right now the numbers say early next year.
Okay, because that's what I think what Aaron's touching on is.
Yeah, but that's a guess.
That you can't. Some of this stuff we can't start until that comes out almost, and it's like with a big package or with a package that even you're only doing in your spare time, you're gonna not have a load of time if that beta's not very early. Yeah,
so we hope to have a couple of months where we consider Umbraco feature complete, but I would still argue that it makes sense for a lot of packages to start before all the things are done for, say, tours we have considered tours is not super important. That could be considered a feature that is added after the point where we say, oh, it's ready for package.
I was writing a tour just before this meeting, and I haven't done one in ages.
Yeah. But as long as we clearly can communicate what parts are not or are still missing,
yeah,
then I think most packages would be able to start earlier.
Well, that's, to be honest, why I've had my repeating thing of not going there until localization was done, which I know is in there now, because I felt that did not fundamentally change it, but did mean if you were in the middle of a package development, you would have had to go back and touch every single file again to fix that. So I don't know if you consider there are any more of them, or if you think
I would say
we've
the
pretty much
backend
battered everything down now.
The backend authorization policies
right.
is also a thing.
Yeah.
There's also permissions. For example, we don't have that yet in the UI.
Do you think permissions would change much in terms of development, though? If you were a package developer developing a front end to do something, the permissions will just one day become on.
Yeah,
and you might have to do your API, but your front end clients, is that going to change much for permissions?
No. I think it's mainly if you want to add your own permission types, you can say that. But otherwise, it should be fine.
Okay.
Anyone got any other questions? Oh, Owen's typed one in the chat. With the current Angular way of doing dashboards, we have access to inject various Umbraco services. Will there be equivalent services available in the new back office? Or would we need to manually do notifications, infinite editor, blade overlays ourselves using UUI?
Yeah, luckily you don't have to do that. There will be a replacing system for that, and that's what we call the context API. But that's just a very broad system that actually explains how you retrieve an API. That means that an API can be local or scoped to certain parts of the application. Yeah, so there will be new APIs replacing what you know of today. Some will be more similar to what you know of today, and some will be treating it quite differently. Yeah, it's going to be an individual case, I think you could say. Yeah.
Are people going to have to release new NuGet ID'd packages for the version 14? If that
don't expect so.
So you should be able to have your current package and then add what you need to have it run in v14 inside the same NuGet package.
In some cases, yes, but it depends. But what I thought the question was if you needed a new name for the NuGet package, like we did for 9. For both forms and deploy and so on.
No, I'm just thinking, like, it sounds to me like if I was going to work on a v14 version of a package, I'd probably be starting, it would be easier to start as a whole new thing rather than trying
I think
I don't expect to do that myself.
When I've looked, I think you can do it side by side. It depends on how complicated it is, and the actual killer is your own API, your backup, if you've got a back office API, because on 14, package.manifest is called Umbraco something.json instead. And so you can have, in theory, a package that's got a package.manifest that would point to your v10 front end, and a Umbraco, whatever it's called, .json, schema.json, that points to the version 14 files. So you could have a v9, in theory, a v10 front end and a v14 front end in the same package. The problem might become if either of them calls a back office API that you've written, then you can't necessarily, I suppose you could multi-target, but you can't have the API two endpoints be the one because of this Umbraco authorized JSON thing. So your version 10 won't be an Umbraco authorized JSON controller, and your version 14 would be a management API style controller. There are obviously ways around that, but I think that's what would make a v10 and v14 single package quite complicated for you. It's doable. Scary. I think probably just a new branch and rewrite all your code.
Yeah, of course, just release a version specifically for V14 upwards. And Matt Brailsford has put in the chat versioned endpoints for the win, which is what I think FTW means. Anyone else? Now's the time. Ronald, please go ahead.
I also wanted to point out that the distribution side of the packages, that's also something we're working on and in like discussing with the package team, community package team, to see what makes sense, because a lot of current NuGet packages have separate dependency packages for the back office UI or core services, and then most of the time like a main package that brings in both the back office UI and the core services, so you can just install a single package. And I guess that's also something we need to like rethink, because the new back office is mainly just a pure front end style application. So it might be that you need, or you are able to release like an npm package for the back office UI for the new back office, and then a NuGet package that just contains the like backend kind of services, so your APIs, your controllers, etc. And then maybe you have something to make it easy again for people that just want to install a single NuGet package and have both the UI that's in the same project set up for you as well. So that will be something to look into in the future, near future as well, and see what makes sense, and if we need to have like some conventions around that as well. So if people have ideas, opinions, then it would be great to start discussions and see what makes sense for other package developers as well. Not really a question, I know, but wanted to point that out.
So Kevin, have you worked out when you can take a holiday next year?
Yeah. I'm going, yes, I'm going to Denmark in December.
He's already had a holiday.
Not to visit anybody. I have had a holiday, it took all month. Not to visit anybody. I'm going to Denmark. I've got a holiday just for a couple of days, but yeah. No, it's fine. I'm in a very fortunate position. I've scheduled the time. It's what I do, so I can just...
Yeah, but you've also got Heutinck, which touches every part of...
Yeah, everyone says that Heutinck's the easy one.
Translation Manager.
Translation Manager's the hard one.
Yeah.
Heutinck's UI isn't as big as Translation Manager's UI. So, and I'm fortunate in that I think the Translation Manager one isn't a day one project. I'm still going to go for it, but Heutinck, we want as close to the release because that's what it's for. Translation Manager, people tend to buy later in the project anyway. Yeah. So we probably won't. That's not our priority, but that's the big one. So we'll make all the mistakes on Heutinck and then make Translation Manager really good.
So you're putting your marker down now that Heutinck on the release date.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. It didn't say it would work.
Yeah. There'll be a release.
I think I heard actually that it won't work, but yeah.
The inbuilt clock already ticking.
Yeah.
Nice. Cornet has suggested a translate all the things banner Code Garden next year, because they're pretty cheap to make, aren't they? Those banners.
I was shown by my finance director yesterday. I was shown the graph of this is the month when Kevin went mad and bought a banner. So, yeah.
Great. Anyone got anything else to say? Because if not, I get to have my lunch early. Okay, well, I'd like to I'm sure people will think of things, of course, the moment we finish the call. But thank you very much to Bjarke and Niels and everyone else, Kevin and Matt and everyone else who contributed to this. This one resulted, as I say, from overhearing that Kevin and Matt had questions for Bjarke. If you have similar needs, let me know, and I'll see if I can just get people to come to the screen another time and we can talk through these questions, or Umbraco Lab maybe one day as a quick chat on Discord or something. The more we can ask questions, the more everyone else will benefit. So thank you very much, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next Packages Question Time. Bye. I feel like I should have a theme tune, but I don't have one. Bye.